Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with a look at your Alaska weather today. It's the 28th of January. It's certainly cold in the interior. We'll check on some of those numbers here in just a few minutes. But if you'd like to check yourself, you can always start with weather.gov/Alaska. Call the weather info line at 800-472-0391. You can head to the Facebook page. NWS Alaska will get you there. NWS Alaska on Twitter, NWS Fairbanks, NWS Anchorage, or NWS Juneau are the local office pages there to give you even more localized information for your region using the hashtag AKwx. And of course, in the afternoon, you get your daily afternoon map briefing on YouTube. Just search for AKwx TV after this show, and you'll get the entire show on YouTube as well. Now, some of the cold, as we know, Alaska is the last frontier of winter. And in Chicken, Alaska, I think this was the coldest morning so far this week. 59 below there. Not a whole lot of folks hang out in Chicken, but those that do are certainly rough, tough, and hard to bluff. At 59 below, that's some serious cold, but not the coldest on record that we know of. The period of record is relatively short for Chicken's observing station there, but we do know that back in January of 2000 and in February of 2008, it was as cold as 72 below zero there. So that is some big time, big Alaska cold there, and if you made it through this morning, hats off to you if you could unfreeze it from your head. Here's a look at the hazardous weather now across southeastern Alaska. Winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings there for the northern sections of southeast. We're expecting anywhere from 4 to 6 inches around Juneau by the time it's done snowing from late this afternoon through this evening and into early tomorrow morning. And for areas around Haines and the Klondike Highway, we're also watching for some heavier snowfall there, especially around the Haines region, probably 9 to 13 inches there for some of the higher terrain. So some of that will come down a little bit harder and heavier by the time it's all said and done, maybe upwards of a foot of snow. And that's a winter storm warning as we head into the late night hours and early morning tomorrow. Otherwise, Gustavus, Skagway, you're looking at winter weather advisory. Totals there around 5 to 9 inches are possible there by the time it's said and done tonight and early tomorrow morning. Now, just this little area here colored in yellow, that's for Thompson Pass. A wind chill advisory is in effect for you through tonight into about noon tomorrow. Looks like wind chill values could drop as low as 40 to 50 below, so it could feel pretty cold if you have to step out of the car for a minute or two. Northeasterlies blowing at 35 to 45 miles an hour through the pass will drop that feels like index there, and obviously you know that's really cold enough to do some damage to your skin, so make sure that if you are traveling through the pass tonight that you're prepared just in case something happens and you have to step out of the car for a minute. Make sure you're bundled up and taking care of yourself. Here's a look at the rest of Alaska in the satellite image. Notice that most of the active weather is across the Gulf, and no doubt it is snowing across northern parts of southeast. Periods of rain a little bit further south today, but as that moved into that really hearty cold air, some of that originating around Chicken earlier this morning. Well, that's just turned into snow across northern sections of southeast, and that will continue to snow in that region at least through tonight and probably early tomorrow morning. By late Thursday and into Friday, chances are it's going to warm up enough that a lot of that will start to turn back into rain. So probably a gradual transition there for northern sections of southeast around the Lynn Canal and up toward Gustavus, but for right now it is cold enough to snow. So around Juneau, 4 to 6 inches again, 5 to 9 around Skagway and Gustavus, and for you folks in Haines, maybe as much as a foot or just a little bit more. Out across the west, that cold and dry air is still sweeping off from the north and east. You can see its effects on the cloud cover there, really keeping some of that lower stratus just close to the Pribilofs, maybe just a little bit further south today. A little more stratus out for the central and west, and some pockets of very light snow shower activity and some of the coldest weather out there. Across most of the interior, though, it's been fairly clear where you're out of the ice fog anyway. Most areas have seen at least some sunshine today, while brief in Barrow. Across the Arctic coast, some stronger winds, though, for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast today, and a little bit of snow and blowing snow. A lot of that starting to push to the east, though, as that stronger pressure gradient's moving into northern Canada. Look at this ridge of high pressure. It stretches all the way from the northwestern provinces all the way across the Arctic coast and then back into the Bering Sea. So any weather system that wants to have any action across the west coast or the interior, certainly the north or southeast, has to work into that northern or that southern periphery of that controlling ridge of high pressure. And this wave is trying to do it. It's working its way, kind of sneaking its way around, finding the weak spots, working into southwestern Alaska, south central and southeast. And there's some of the rain that we saw earlier in southeast today. As we go into tonight, that front's going to find a little bit of a weakness and continue working its way northward. And there's some of our heavier snowfall that we expect to continue into the evening hours for northern parts of southeast with that winter storm warning. For Prince William Sound, some of that could be rain and snow, and we do expect some snow to form in south central and the Copper River Basin as we head into tonight, primarily after midnight. We could start to pick up some snow showers. Some of that might turn into an inch and a half around south central. Head across the west, the northeasterly winds will work in tandem with the topography, and with that we should see some snow showers there for the central eastern chain and also for the Alaska Peninsula, with high pressure keeping a lock on pretty much a clear and very cold sky across the central and western parts of Alaska. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice something changing out here across the west. Our ridge is still in control of the Bering at 1,039 millibars, but some colder air is working its way across the Kamchatka Peninsula, but it's not cold enough yet to beat out the very stable area of high pressure across the Bering. So it's going to sit out there, and it's going to focus clouds and more of a southerly flow right up the eastern side of the Kamchatka Peninsula. We'll have to see what happens to that. The one thing that may change first is this wave of low pressure. It'll see if it can't work into this, the northwestern sections of Alaska as we head into this weekend and maybe into early next week. That cold air is going to have to strengthen, though, before it does that, because this is already cold and already very dense and already very stable. Low pressure across southern Yukon at 1,022 millibars will sit and spin. The frontal boundary that brought us the active weather across south central and southeast is starting to fall apart. The rain's not entirely gone, though, yet. This whole air mass is starting to mix up a little bit more. So we'll continue with coastal precipitation, mainly along the Pacific side. South central, we'll still be looking at some passing snow showers as we head into Thursday afternoon and probably into Friday, though that will gradually wane away as we head into the end of the week. You'll notice the drier air starting to win back the Cook Inlet region ever so slightly there, though we still could have some light snow up and down the Cook Inlet as we get into Friday afternoon. Snow will likely focus on the Copper River Basin and points a little bit further east of Prince William Sound as we get toward the end of the week. And for southeast, that drier air is starting to win. You'll notice that's working its way northward once again, limiting the opportunity of precipitation and even cloud cover from areas from Sitka southward into the Dixon entrance. Meanwhile, the interior is starting to fill back in with clouds around the Chukchi Seacoast. Pressure gradients tightening up a little bit. Something's changing up here. Let's see if that cold air will start to work its way in from the north and west. It may certainly bring in some snow to the northwestern coast, maybe even into the Bering Strait by Friday. Snow and blowing snow, well, starting to creep back into the Beaufort Seacoast. You'll see the wind first across the north coast, and high pressure still in charge of the Yukon Valley. And that means many of your mornings, at least, and maybe some of your afternoons will be dealing with a wide area of fog. So watch for some changes there as high pressure works its way around the lower terrain of Alaska and the interior by the end of the week. Temp-wise today, 30s and 40s for a large area in southeast. That frontal boundary lifting northward left the warmer air from Sitka all the way down toward Ketchikan and Annette. Hyder was only 34 today. Juneau 32, and up around Haines and Skagway we saw temperatures in the mid-20s. Yakutat was 35. Valdez only 9 degrees today, but it was a little bit of a different story out around Cordova at 29. Snowfall there today. Middleton Island was 32, so we know the ocean water is certainly milder considering what Valdez is looking at right now. Low teens from Anchorage down to Kenai, 27 around Homer, 2 below in Squentin, while Talkeetna is 17 above. In the interior, a different story for sure. Temperatures were well below zero, anywhere from 15 below in Fort Greely. I'm sorry, that's Healy, I should say. Fort Greely was 13, 25 below in Fairbanks, 27 below in Eagle, and Fort Yukon sticking out like a sore thumb at 44 below, 42 in Arctic Village, 20 below in Anaktuvuk Pass. The Arctic coast was looking at temps from about 16 below to almost 30 below around Barrow and Atkasuk. Around Kivalina, 28 below. Kotzebue Sound temperatures were only a little bit milder as you head toward Kotzebue and areas closer to Shishmaref. 6 below around Nome. Unalakleet was 5 below. McGrath was showing 18 below. Bethel 2 below. And many areas around Southwest were just a little bit milder, but at least above zero. Teens and 20s for many in Bristol Bay, 29 there in King Salmon. For the Alaska Peninsula, the Bering Sea coast was colder, mainly in the 30s. The Pacific coast, including False Pass and it looks like Sand Point, 41 degrees there. Chignik was 37. Kodiak Island in the 30s and 40s. And the chain, generally in the mid to upper 30s today. Dutch Harbor, Unalaska was 37. The Pribilofs in the mid 20s. Now for overnight lows, look for most areas in the interior to drop to 30 to even 50 below in Fort Yukon. Eagle, probably Chicken once again. You'll see those just extreme cold areas there thanks to that stabilizing ridge of high pressure. The Arctic coast from 20 to about 35 below. 4 below in Nome, Southwest, looking at temps from 0 to about 10 above. If you get down into the Bristol Bay region, you might be looking at readings there about 0 to 3 above. Nunivak Island around 7. St. Lawrence Island about 4 above. The Pribilofs in the upper 20s. Kodiak Island near 36 and low to mid 30s for the chain. Tomorrow afternoon, expect high temperatures there in Fort Yukon to only reach around 37 below. Fairbanks 20 below, South Central teens and 20s, Kodiak Island closer to 40, and you'll see readings in the upper 30s and lower 40s for most of northern southeast, southern southeast, probably mid 40s there. The Arctic coast anywhere from 15 to 25 below. The Seward Peninsula, including Nome, well, the north side is going to be colder, about 10 below in Shishmaref and 3 above in Nome. Southwest in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, looking at temps at 0 to about 5 above. Once you get into the interior and east of Bethel, you're looking at those readings probably in the 10 below to 20 below range, including areas around McGrath in the upper Kuskokwim Valley. Flying weather tomorrow, expect MVFR conditions with still a little bit of a breeze, maybe more of a brisk wind from time to time across the Beaufort Seacoast. MVFR there, and MVFR for the northern parts of southeast with snow on the ground and some of that still falling in some of the passes. Prince William Sound down to Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula expecting MVFR with a thin strip of IFR, mainly south of Montague Island. In Aktivik Pass and Adigan Pass, though, we expect to see VFR conditions in all of the passes in the Alaska range, at least to start. It should be VFR through a good part of the day because the snow will probably focus more on the south central areas. Now, we would expect that Portage Pass will likely see some changes as we go through tonight and into early tomorrow morning, so that may be hit and miss. Expect some isolated MVFR in the region if those snow showers linger around Portage Pass tomorrow. Chilkoot and White Pass, at least MVFR. That might lean over to IFR if the snow is sticking around. So again, check your maps before you head out. Your freezing levels show the warm air is retreating a little bit from the eastern sections of southeast, but you can see that the surface freezing line really hasn't changed a whole lot in the last several days. Still hugging the Alaska Peninsula coastline, still sitting very close to the chain. There are some signs of warmer weather coming in from the North Pacific, reaching into the far western Bering Sea. Icing potential remains occasional to widespread moderate across the northern parts of southeast and right around Prince William Sound to Kodiak Island. A lot of that will be found above 4,000 feet. And we saw some isolated rime reports today for those of you flying in central and southern parts of southeast as that front was moving through. Across the Beaufort Seacoast, anywhere below 8,000 feet, there's still plenty of moisture there, and we know it's plenty cold, so watch for light to isolated moderate. That and the visibility, probably not doing a whole lot of flying there anyway. The jet stream shows a west and northwesterly flow coming out of the Arctic Ocean at 85 knots. That's blowing into the central areas of Canada, but we have a very pronounced and high amplitude or very wavy jet here. We've got a pretty strong southerly flow that turns back into more of a northerly flow coming out of the Bering, and then a really large trough. This amplitude, this type of pattern here kind of puts on the brakes so the weather isn't moving along and doing the next thing. We're not getting storm after storm. Instead, we're kind of hanging out under the same old weather. So until this pattern starts to smooth out a little bit, we'll still be locked in this deep cold in the interior and probably a fairly wet period for southeast and a relatively dry period for south central Alaska. So until we see that change, status quo. Northerly winds working out of the central areas of Alaska and working their way from the north and east through Bristol Bay. You'll see low pressure there south of Kodiak Island. Some of the stronger winds then will be over the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern chain with high pressure across the southern Bering. Southerly flow dominates the eastern Gulf, anywhere from 15 to 50 knots at its strongest point. Winds are fairly light across the interior along the Alcan and then pick up once you get into the Alaska Range and points west. Across the Northland, you're looking at a west and northwesterly flow over the Brooks Range. More of the same there at 3,000 feet. Northerlies coming in, moving in from the north and east across Bristol Bay. Slowing down a little bit as you head further out into the Bering Sea, but Pretty healthy onshore flow for the Chukchi Seacoast and northwesterlies moving out of the Beaufort Sea into Canada, and southerly flow dominates the central and eastern parts of the Gulf and therefore southeastern Alaska around 15 to 20 knots. And how about turbulence? Well, we're going to focus on areas around the Kuskokwim Delta and southwestern Alaska below 4,000 feet. Many areas there north of Dillingham could at least see some light to isolated chop. And around the Alaska Peninsula into the central and eastern chain, there's a possibility for some occasional moderate below 4,000 feet and also just outside of Prince William Sound. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be right back with your marine weather in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the Day-Night Band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down, and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible. The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery. Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Oh, okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
But this looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. We can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights.
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about GINA and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And welcome back to the show. I'm Mike Ottenweller, and I'll be taking you through the marine forecast for tonight. As you can see here, looking towards southeast Alaska, forecast for Thursday, towards Clarence Strait and up towards Stevens Passage, we're expecting winds southeast to southerly, 25 to 20 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas in that region. And then as you get up towards Lynn Canal, we'll see winds come out of the north, 30 knots and 6 foot seas. Off to the Gulf Coast here, we see southwest flow dominating, 15 to 25 knots coming around that area of low pressure, and we'll see seas on the order of 11 feet. Up towards Yakutat in the eastern Gulf, winds will be coming out of the east at 15 knots and seas averaging around 9 feet. Looking towards south central Alaska, up in the Cook Inlet region, we have northeasterly flow, 20 knots and 5 foot seas. We will continue to see freezing spray through this region for the next 36 to 48 hours with those stronger northeast winds and an increasing ice pack. Towards Prince William Sound, northeast flow there as well, 15 knots and 3 foot seas. Higher gusts out of bays and passes, mainly through the evening hours. We should see those diminish towards Friday. And then on the Gulf Coast regions, southeast 15 as you get towards the south central portion, and then becoming northeast 20 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas in the Barren Islands, and then bringing it out of the southeast 15 knots near Kodiak Island with 9 foot seas. Winds and waves again will increase from northeast to southwest, 20 to 35 knots by the time you get to Shelikof Strait, and seas building from 5 all the way up to 12 feet in Shelikof Strait there. On towards the Alaska Peninsula now, northeast flow continues to dominate this region here, pinched between the high over the western Bering and the low south of the Alaska Peninsula. 30 to 35 knots north of the Alaska Peninsula and 20 to 35 south of the chain. Seas will be on the order from 6 feet off the ice edge and building to 13 feet with some freezing spray right off the ice edge, and 11 to 8 foot seas south of the Alaska Peninsula. As we get towards the Aleutian chain, northeast flow continues through this area. Seas generally on the order of 18 to 19 feet, slightly higher north of the chain, becoming 17 feet as you get towards Atka and Adak on the Pacific side, and running on the order of about 40 knots. A little bit farther to the west in the western Aleutians, 14 foot seas and 30 knots from the northeast, and then becoming southeast as you get out towards Shimia. As we step towards the west coast of Alaska, on Thursday you'll see northerly flow continue through this region here. 15 knots near St. Lawrence Island, becoming 35 knots by the time you get towards the Pribilofs. 4-foot seas to 7-foot seas right along the ice edge, and those will be building as you get a little bit farther away from the edge at 14 feet. And we will have some freezing spray conditions in this area on Thursday. That should be improving by Friday as we see that area of low pressure work in from Russia towards the western portion of the Bering Sea. And finally, for your Arctic coast, we see variable winds northwest to southerly for the northwest portion just outside of the Chukchi Sea, 15 to 10 knots in that area, and then becoming south to westerly, 10 to 15 knots for the northern portion of the state. On Friday, we'll see that low pressure system approach from the Chukchi Sea, moving towards the Beaufort Sea, and with that, winds will increase out of the south to 40 to 45 knots. We will see some brisk wind advisory conditions in that area, some blowing snow with that as well. So recapping tonight's weather, we can see a low pressure center just south of the Alaska Peninsula near Kodiak Island, bringing the rain-snow mix to the island there, and no accumulation really expected. The bigger story is as we get towards the Panhandle, we do have those winter weather advisories in effect for the Juneau area and winter weather warning in effect for Haines. We're looking for on the order of 9 to 13 inches in the warning area, and approximately 4 to 6 and 5 to 9 inches as you get towards Skagway and Gustavus. Looking into Thursday's forecast, we'll see those advisories come to the end from the morning to the afternoon hours there in the southeast Alaska as that low pressure center moves into Canada. High pressure continues over the most of the northern portion of the state, keeping patchy fog and some cold, clear conditions persisting throughout much of the interior regions. That dry northeasterly flow will continue to produce offshore flow, some light showers, mixed rain and snow there just south of the Aleutian Chain and the Alaska Peninsula. And then stepping into Friday, we again see that low pressure moving into the Arctic areas, bringing a southerly fetch and precipitation diminishing along the Gulf Coast. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm Mike Ottenweller. Have a great evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.